folks. It's Alex Brown, the chair of the Greater Chico Homeless Task Force, and I'm here with Lauren Kennedy, executive director of the North Valley Housing Trust. One of our recent task force meetings got cut short, and so we decided to try something a little bit different this time to inform our community and our members about affordable housing in our region. So today we're going to do more of a conversation style rather than a presentation style and talk about affordable housing. So it's good to have you here, Lauren.
Thank you.
I think I just want to jump right into the questions, and one of the questions that feels pretty important to answer is, what do we mean when we use the term affordable housing?
Yeah, that is a great one to start with because as somebody who works in multiple spheres of housing, quote unquote affordable housing, emergency shelter, also work as a realtor, the term for affordable housing means something different to a lot of different people. So when we talk about affordable housing at the Housing Trust, generally what we mean is housing that's affordable to people earning the lowest incomes. And affordable means people aren't paying more than 30% of their gross income to their housing. This is a big deal because when housing is not affordable, when people have to pay more than 30% of their income, that is the circumstance that leads to homelessness. We've seen as those numbers go up, as those affordability numbers climb, so like I think statewide for that extremely low income group, 0 to 30% of area median income, statewide 76% of those households pay more than 50% of their income towards rent. So that's a ton of people who are like right on the verge of not being able to afford housing at all, enter into homelessness, and those are the people that have to make that choice every day between multiple basic needs. Locally, we have about 50% of people total who are rent burdened, people paying more than 30% of their income towards rent.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I know we'll talk a little bit more about some of those statistics local to our area, but for now, what is the function of a housing trust? Can you kind of explain the work that you do in our region?
So we can pool all kinds of funds as a nonprofit housing trust, funds from the government, from our local government, funds from local foundations, funds from local businesses, pool all of that, hopefully leverage it for additional state and federal grants, basically double the impact of whatever dollars we raise. But in any case, use those funds to do revolving loans out into the community to get projects started. And then all that money then stays local and goes out into additional projects.
What kind of projects could be funded by a housing trust?
Yeah, our priority is shorter term loans right now. There's only 5 or 6 other housing trusts that are nonprofits like us in the state. They're farther ahead, and so they have permanent loan funds at this point. Ours would be more shorter term for construction, acquisition of land, rehabilitation of buildings, pre-development costs, and like I said, in the future, we hope permanent loan funds.
Well, coupling the reality that it takes a lot for housing trusts to get off the ground and the reality that we are in kind of a dire place with our affordable housing environment, I think it's important for folks to understand that situation. Can you overview where we are locally in terms of housing affordability and how we got here, and maybe just share a few statistics about how that relates to our local community?
Statewide, when we call attention to the housing crisis, and again, I'm mostly talking about this extremely low income and very low income bracket, basically 0 to 60% area median income earners, which for our region, that's like $12,000 to $26,000 a year for an individual. So people making less than $26,000 a year for a single person. And it's a little different for households, but statewide, the number that scares everybody is that for every 100 extremely low-income households that need housing, there's only 22 units available. But in our region, based on the city of Chico's numbers, that number is more like 2 units of housing available for every 100 households that need them. So it creates the housing mess that we all see. It means that more people are cost burdened. They're paying more of their income for rent. And that means that the sort of workforce starting cheap 1 and 2 bedrooms that would be freed up if we had more specifically affordable housing. Those are impacted. It's harder for people to find those sort of cheap starter level rentals, and more people are ending up on the street by a huge number. I think we had a 25% jump last year, and the vast majority of people at the point in time survey are from Butte County. So yeah, that number, that 2 units for every 100 households looking, is a real crisis for us. Some good news is because of a real windfall of tax credits, which is how a lot of subsidized affordable housing is funded. We have like between 500 and 700 units of quote unquote affordable housing planned for the region, but not all of that will be available to that lowest income group. Some of that will be higher, 60%, 80% of area median income. So it doesn't really impact those lower numbers. And also, back in 2014, we needed about 1,000 units of extremely low income housing. So even if all 700 units were for that bracket, we would still be only partway to the need that we had back in 2014. So unless additional help is brought in, we're going to keep seeing both an acceleration of rent prices, although now that's thankfully slowed somewhat by the local and state caps, and an acceleration of homelessness.
So our viewers and our members are often doing the work of supporting low-income and homeless folks in our community. In what way does a housing trust or local financing, as you put it, impact homelessness and play a role in ending homelessness?
A housing trust helps more housing happen because a lack of financing is one of the big blocks to building housing. It's expensive to build housing now. We can talk about that too. And the federal and state funds that have been available for housing, like RDA funds and federal tax credits, have shrunk or been cut altogether. Like now the federal government, I think, spends about 30% of what it did 50 years ago on low-income homes, and it now outspends 4 to 1 on subsidies for homeowners earning more than $200K as it does on low-income housing. So the federal government is basically spending 4 times as much on wealthy home ownership than it is on low-income housing, and that's new. That happened the last 35, 40 years. So as those funds were cut, a housing trust or local financing mechanisms is what allows housing to be built, and that's the only thing that alleviates homelessness is adequate housing.
Right. Well, affordable housing isn't possible without people being willing to develop it. So what are some barriers, and you noted this, what are some barriers to small-scale developers that they face when working on affordable housing projects?
So one of our issues in Chico is it's tough to find land. This is why the arguments that are in theory in favor of low-income housing or in favor of shelter and say that they're supportive of those efforts, but they just think a different location should be found, are sort of frustrating and heartbreaking to hear, because the truth is that it's really hard to find land that can be used for that now. If you're a small developer, most of the funds available for affordable housing, this like lowest income, supportive services housing, is going to be in the form of tax credits. And that program is extremely competitive and complicated. So nobody is getting those funds unless they have a long track record of successful development, or they're partnering with somebody with a long track record of successful development. So I think in that sense, nobody who's a small developer is going to just out the gate be able to access those. State and federal grant programs are very complicated. A local project that we like, Base Camp Village, which was locally financed with Ron Reed at the helm, a local attorney and developer, with the help of Mia Kirk, local, she's the executive director and also in public health. We got that project done in a year in Orville, 12 units of permanent supportive housing. The whole thing was under $1 million. But $300,000 of that entire project budget was just hookup fees and permits. So that's another big reason, is that it's really, the fees are out of the reach for a lot of projects. that's a third of the entire project's budget. And there's I think a strong argument to be made that for this realm of housing, this housing that specifically is making an impact on homelessness, that those fees should be waived and changed, because it's not a profit-making venture, and I believe that it actually saves. There's plenty of evidence to show that it saves cities and counties money to have people adequately housed.
There's obviously a lot of work to be done. We're in a dire housing situation, but I don't think that you would be showing up to work every day if there wasn't hope or possibility of making things better. And so what makes you hopeful about doing this work, and what do you feel like needs to happen in order for us to get out of this crisis locally and regionally?
A lot of what keeps me showing up is the work of my peers, and seeing other people working for housing in this community. They keep showing up too, and I want to support them and do my piece. There's a lot of great ideas and a lot of great work, and they deserve the funds to get those projects done. I've been inspired by an internship program that a statewide housing organization runs that helps get students of color into affordable housing development and careers, with an emphasis too on students who have lived experience in affordable housing. I feel like that's absolutely going to change the game. We need, as long as we have housed people, comfortably housed people making all the decisions around emergency housing, it's not going to change fast enough. But if we can get people who know the impact and what's at stake in those positions, that's really inspiring. So yeah, that's. Oh, and for the Housing Trust, I do believe in this model. I've seen it work other places. In San Luis Obispo, they've got a trust that looks like ours that now works with $25 million pots each year, and they're able to help along projects that otherwise wouldn't exist. Housing for ex-felons coming out who now get really supportive reentry programs in communities that are suited to them. Sober living environments, domestic violence shelters for survivors. Those projects wouldn't exist down there if the Housing Trust there had not been able to help. So that keeps me at it too, hoping that we can grow into something similarly successful.
Well, one final question for you. What sorts of things would make the North Valley Housing Trust specifically successful in getting more affordable housing online in our communities? How can our viewers help? How can our community help?
We are looking for folks who want to make an impact on housing. We can leverage their money to do that. And again, it doesn't have to be a gift. It can be a loan to us that we can put to work. I'm waiting on some updated numbers, but we expected, pre-March, we were expecting that there was a need for about $1 million a year in specifically the kind of funding that the Housing Trust could give. So I know the need is out there, so we could use funds. And then, more participation with local governments also. Again, that was one of the reasons that I think the city of Chico went with a nonprofit instead of a city-based fund, is that housing is a regional issue. The Camp Fire taught us that if we didn't already know, that what happens in the town of Paradise affects the city of Chico, affects Orville, affects Hamilton City. What happens in the Bay Area and Sacramento affects Chico. So housing is a regional issue, and I think if we work on regional solutions, which we can do as a trust, then we can make an impact.
Well, Lauren, thank you so much for the conversation today. Thank you for your work and your advocacy. I hope that the task force and all of the other entities that need to be involved in this work can do that, and we can move this forward together. And I appreciated the time with you today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Of course. All right, folks. Well, that's that. Please continue to follow the North Valley Housing Trust's work, and we'll see you at an upcoming meeting or in the community.